the way public money is dispersed within Scotland and Wales. The Conservative Party today is very different in its attitude compared to the unionist, almost homogeneous belief in no breakup of the Union pre-1997. Labour has, since '74, in both Wales and Scotland, been a devolutionist party, and has not believed that the administrative devolution of Secretaries of State is a satisfactory long-term answer, and some sort of democratic answer has to come in, and has campaigned on that basis really for the last 10 or so general elections since the second election of '74. But, you know, parties do renew their ideas. There was the Nye-Bevan tradition in Wales was different, anti-devolution. The function of the Welsh working class was to be the vanguard of the British working class, because he thought the Welsh working class was perhaps a little bit more politically and ideologically driven ideas, and therefore if you take the Welsh working class out of the frame through devolution, it's no longer there to be the vanguard of the British working class, and that's going to leave the British working class leaderless. That's the sort of Bevan anti-devolution argument, but that's, a much weaker argument now with the idea of a big working class dominating the population, providing ideas through the miners' libraries in the different locations in the valley. That really is, now 50 or 60 years out of date, but we have to clock it as a tradition, of which there are still some inheritors within the Welsh Labour Party. But the parties are always in a state of continuous evolution. It is, I am told, a historical fact that Bernard Shaw, for instance, stood as the Labour Party candidate in St Pancras Borough Council in 1905 on a platform of republicanism, teetotalism and militant vegetarianism. But not every one of those ideas has survived in the party's wider policy today. And I do recall when I briefly lived in the United States for 2 years, from 1961 to 1963, it was the year, the autumn of '62 was the year that Teddy Kennedy, who was still a senator, now first stood for the Senate. And one of the great Republican families of Boston, the Lodges, the Cabot Lodges, George Lodge, one of the latest guys was put up for the Republicans. And Teddy Kennedy was seen as a playboy, George Lodge was seen as just simply, the latest in his generation. So there was definitely a gap in the market. And an independent professor of history at Harvard called H. Stuart Hughes stood and was doing very well. He had 7 children, even on the Irish Catholic tradition of Hughes, on the Welsh Hughes, having 7 children in a very Catholic area like Boston was going down extremely well, until one day, quite late in the campaign, his minders had been diverted by some reason, and a radio reporter managed to get a mic under his nose and said, "Professor Hughes, for the benefit of the listeners of Radio WCOG Boston, could you tell them just very, very briefly what is the platform you're standing on?" I said, "Yes, I can tell you very quickly. I'm standing on a platform of saying that I'm an atheist, a socialist and a pacifist." And the radio reporter said, "There goes the ball game!" And how do you summarise where a platform is? And your minders are not there for a second or two, and from that moment on, they were downhill. And then Cuba weekend came anyway, and the president went in a landslide. But I don't say that Cuba weekend was arranged by the Kennedys to make sure that young Kennedy was elected. That would be too conspiratorial. But let's just say that the evolution of ideas is really quite rapid over the past 10 years. Wales voted overwhelmingly against devolution in 1979, and 4-to-1 majority against, like the one in the northeast, just recently northeast of England. That was seen as settling the whole issue in for a generation or more. How can you reverse a 4-to-1 majority in a referendum? But less than 20 years later, the Act of Parliament creating the National Assembly for Wales was on the status quo. And it was the experience really of Thatcherism that led to the conviction changing among Welsh voters that they would be better off in charge of their own domestic affairs and not rely always on successive secretaries of state who, by the latter part of the Thatcher era, were not from Wales and were just using Wales as a platform to think about challenging their own party leaders. Walker against Thatcher, though that one never happened. Redwood against Labour, that one did happen. So you use Wales as a platform to, do a bit of grandstanding, but you really do with it so that you can then challenge your own party leader to be the potential Prime Minister. So as the pendulum swing against Franco led to this strong model of asymmetric devolution following his death as regards Catalonia and the Basque Country and Galicia, and then more generally, although a more attenuated form of devolution for the rest of Spain, Margaret Thatcher, and then with this late reminder of Thatcherism through John Redwood in 93 to 95, worked very well for devolution in Wales in the 97 referendum. But I don't think that quite the same was required in Scotland, although going for the vote tax a year early may have acted as good evil propaganda for the pro-devolution campaign here. But the Assembly was seen in Wales really as an insurance policy against the return of the big bad wolf or the big bad wolves of Thatcher and Redwood. And it helped to overcome this Welsh traditional diffidence about being able to make our own decisions because of this lack of a tradition of autonomy in civil society. And what have we got now is this control of the budget and very modest legislative powers, which may be advancing now through the Government of Wales, but we do control those key domestic policy fields of health, education, housing, local government and economic development and the environment, while retaining the best of both world benefits of the UK-wide economy, the UK's position in the world, and the UK-wide pool of talent from which to shape our futures. Now, that's a devolutionist position, and devolution is moving ahead now from Act 2 devolution in Wales, and following yesterday, I'm not sure really what's going to happen because there could be lots of issues about the Parliament and the government in Scotland, clearly following yesterday. But the Lib Dem position then is the federalist position where instead of devolving downwards from central government, you pretend in the case of the UK that the UK is a building block of 4 separate countries. The Lib Dems have it in their party constitution. Germany has it, although we put it into their constitution. The USA is a federation, the building blocks are down, and the federal government's created on top. Australia starts with the states, the federal government, Canada starts with the provinces, then you have federal government on top of it. Belgium is very, very federalist. Some areas where the federal government has no competence, like education, and haven't got a government, haven't had one for 6 months, nobody really notices, because again, weak central government. Now, Germany might be seen as a good advertisement for the federal model. USA, Australia, Canada, very happy examples of federal government. Belgium, not a happy advertisement for federal government. Nobody notices we haven't got one. That's not a good sign. But in a way, we could make the same criticism about the Liberal Democrats because of this internal federalism. Again, you could say, well, is this an advertisement? And you say, well, the Lib Dems could be playing a much bigger part in government in Wales and in Scotland today if, for some reason, they haven't lost the will to live or participate in the consequences of the elections in May of last year, still this year. So, what is the last alternative then is full breakup of the UK and nationalism. Nationalist parties in Scotland, the Nationalist Party in Scotland and the NSP, and in a more subtle way these days, the Nationalist Party or tradition in Northern Ireland, and certainly in a much more subtle way the Nationalist Party in Wales, with the junior partners in our coalition, believe there can be, or will be definitely, positive advantages from the breakup of the United Kingdom. You will know these arguments better than I will from the Scottish perspective of an SNP minority government. That there are countries smaller than Scotland, the so-called Arbor prosperity argument, which run themselves successfully as states and as economies. And we could argue in Wales, oh well,